friends. Welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I'm Mr. Forest, and today I have a conversation with Jeffrey Kripal. Jeffrey is the Associate Dean of the School of Humanities and is the chair in philosophy and religious thought at Rice University. I believe he's a professor in the Department of Religion, and we got into all sorts of wonderful things. He has expertise in paranormal, and I mean, he just knows a lot about a lot of things. And so I did bounce around quite a bit, and he was very generous to do so. And I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I know you will too. It says on his website he helped create a program, a doctoral concentration in the study of Gnosticism, Esotericism, and Mysticism. Many isms. But those are three. That's a really wonderful pairing. And it's so unique. So he has his incredibly unique perspective, and you're going to love this conversation. And we are going to dive into it very soon. I did just get back from our tour in Europe. Rada was with me, and we had a swimmingly good time. Always all the ups and downs as touring goes, but this was a good one. We even stopped in Germany to go to our friend's wedding, which was wonderful, but it was a lot of travel, a lot of moving, and we'll probably do a Radha Krishna roundtable to tell you all the stories. There were some fun ones that came out of this, but thank you to everyone who came to the shows in Poland, in Dublin, in London, and Peter Broderick, especially for playing those shows in Dublin and London. Man, I mean, it was so cool to play with him, and I just loved some of the music that came out of that. I hope we can do more. Well, we are doing it again in Japan, so I don't know if you want to come to Japan, but for those who are in Japan, I will be at the Each Story Festival at the end of September, and then I will be playing a show right after that in Tokyo with Peter, and then I'll be doing a solo show, I hope, a few days later, somewhere in Japan, TBD, still waiting to figure that one out. But before then, we're going to be at the Ram Dass Legacy Retreat in North Carolina very soon, August 24th through 28th. We'll be at the Altered States Esalen week-long symposium retreat. So this involves other facilitators and teachers and thought people, September 4th through 8th in Big Sur, California. Cool thing about that at Esalen is for the first time, the plan, at least right now, is Thursday night, I'll be doing an outdoor on the lawn at sunset ceremony concert. Never done anything like this at Esalen. Always wanted to do it. If you've been to Esalen, you know that lawn there is this huge lawn right against the Pacific Ocean on the cliff. It's stunning. And I've always thought this would be such an amazing place as the sun goes down right behind you, with like whales and dolphins and otters in the ocean, and see where that beautiful landscape and nature and ocean sounds take us. I believe they're also selling day passes, which is something I don't believe they've done for this actual experience. So if you're in the area, check it out. That's all at eastforest.org. And we also just announced our December Journey Space retreat at Esalen, December 15th through 18th. That's me and Rada. It's about 2/3 full as of now. It will sell out, so if you want to come, get your spot now. And there will be some more dates. You can find out about all this stuff and everything that's added at eastforest.org. Sign up for the newsletter, and we'll give you geolocated emails if something's coming to your area. That is the best place besides, I suppose, social media, East Forest and East Forest Music on the socials. Also, of course, thank you to everyone who is on the council. Our council on Patreon, patreon.com/eastforest. Tonight, actually, is one of the monthly, once a month, we do a gathering. I call it the council gathering, where we do some sharing and discussing, and then we do a live meditation with music that is based on what's going on for all of us and the weaving of that web from all of us in different parts of the globe. But I also get to share demos and unreleased music. I like stuff like from this last tour, stuff I'm working on, stuff I found, advanced releases of other music, and so forth and so on. So see if that interests you at a level that is comfortable for you, and I thank you for the support. It's a great way to support this podcast, but the project in general. eastforest.org or patreon.com/ East Forest. Is there any other housekeeping that we need to take care of? Well, nothing that should impede this wonderful and deep conversation with Jeffrey Kripal. So let's get into it now. Here we go. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining me. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Thank you.
So, if we could just start, I'm going to turn this off too.
Yeah, I'm going to turn this off as well.
The beepings and the notifications. Turn life off for a second.
Yeah. There we go.
Would you mind just giving us just a little background on who you are and a little bit about your background for those who may or may not know of you, and we can dive in?
Sure. I don't want to sound like a resume. That's why I'm hesitating.
Well, you're a professor.
I am. I'm a professor of religion at Rice University in Houston, Texas. I just finished 4 years in the dean's office. I was an associate dean of the School of Humanities, so I think about the humanities as a whole, the context of higher education. I spent the first half of my career really working on erotic forms of mystical literature in both Asia and Europe and kind of the Euro-American scene.
Mm-hmm.
And for the last, 15 or 20 years, I've really looked at alternative currents in American culture. And I now work on, I think, what most people would call the paranormal, extraordinary or extreme events that are often coded or interpreted religiously. Not always, but certainly often. And so that's what I do now.
Cool. May I ask, your interest as of late or the last few years or however long it's been into the more paranormal or metaphysical or, dare we say, spiritual, was there any sort of happening in your life that led to that? Or tell me a little bit about that shift.
Yeah, people ask me that a lot. Yes and no. First of all, I'm kind of a spiritual dud.
What does that mean?
Well, it means I don't walk around having these kinds of experiences. I mean, some people just sit down and meditate and they're boom.
Or so they say. Yeah.
Well, but I actually believe them.
Yeah, that's true.
I think people are like really different and put together differently, and I'm pretty thick. But I have had a few of these experiences over the course of my career or course of my life, and I started out wanting to be a monk. I've had a profound kind of religious or spiritual orientation from the time that I was an adolescent at 12 or 13. And I spent 4 years in a Catholic seminary wanting to join a monastic life. So I've had these religious and theological interests from day one. And I've had odd experiences as far as I can see back. But I wasn't interested in this topic. I mean, I was really interested in the way human sexuality and spiritual experience interfaced or came together. And I felt that people weren't being honest about it. I don't think they're being honest about it still. I don't think the religious traditions are honest about it. I think we're duping ourselves on a lot of levels. And I don't blame anyone. I don't believe in secret committees somewhere, controlling the levers.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm saying. I don't think human beings have owned up to how tight sexual and spiritual experiences really are. And so I got into a lot of trouble saying those things in the 1990s, and I had to reimagine myself and reimagine my intellectual career. So I got interested in California and the counterculture in particular after the turn of the millennium, really as a way to survive. Frankly, it was I was trying to survive spiritually and intellectually, and I ended up at a place called the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California,
Yeah.
and got to know a lot of people who really shaped the counterculture on a lot of different levels. And I was really impressed with what I saw. And I, I didn't think these people were going to harass or follow me for my interests. And quite the contrary, they told me things I couldn't write about. I was like, I can't write about that. And they're like, yeah, but I want to tell you. I'm like, okay.
In the tubs. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, oh my God, the things I heard. Um, and writing this history of the counterculture is a big book called Esalen, America and the Religion of No Religion, and it's really not just about Esalen. It's really about everything that's happening. Then I I kept talking to people who would tell me these crazy stories that I realized were true, and by true I mean that they happen. I just mean that they happen.
Right, 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 right.
And I tried to talk about those things in my professional world with other scholars of religion. I just got really weird looks, and they didn't want to. And I'm like, this happens.
Oh, he's back from Esalen with
Yeah,
his stories. Yeah.
yeah. But I'm like, this is actually happening. And what I realized is that most of my colleagues, whom I just adore, I mean, listen, I'm an academic, I'm a nerd. I realized that they knew I was they knew these things. They understood, but that the field and the culture was so censorious and so in such a denial around them that I found that to be a really interesting question. And so I got really interested in kind of the intellectual history of the paranormal and how it began among intellectuals and then floated away and then was kind of entered entertainment and film and things and is only now I think coming back into serious
Hmm.
attention.
Yeah. I have a connection with Esalen as well. I've been, my partner and I have been leading retreats there for the last 5 or 6 years, and we're going to
Oh,
be there in
good.
September. Yeah.
Oh, good. What's your retreats on? What kind of retreats?
Music primarily,
Uh-huh.
and the role of music and ceremony, and just using that through different modalities
Uh-huh.
and seeing what happens to you. So it's sort of a little micro laboratory where we do things like music ceremonies or music with yoga or co-creative music or different forms of music and listening and sound, and they get to experiment to build maybe a little recipe of what works for them.
Yeah. Well, Eslen's my spiritual home, and
Yeah.
I help run the place, and I don't control or influence programming, which is what brings you there. But I certainly think about Esalen almost every day,
Hmm.
and help imagine its future.
When was the last time you were there?
COVID kind of destroyed everything.
Yeah.
I'm going to be there this summer again. I think I was. I mean, I don't remember the last time I was there was probably last summer. So it's been a while.
They're
Um,
doing they just announced it, this thing about altered states
yeah,
in, yeah. You should come out. Maybe we can get you out
yeah.
for that.
Well, I used to go out 4 or 5 times a year, and I've taught there for a month at a time, many times, and
Yeah.
I've spent a good share of my life there. Um,
Yeah.
but the last 4 years I've been in university administration, and we had a pandemic, of course, and that really put the kibosh on things in terms of big.
Sure. Sure. Well, I want to ask you about the human potential movement, or different ways we could define it. And Estlin certainly was at the forefront of this for a long time, but the manifestations it's taking today, and sort of the role that even things like this play in that, or
Yeah,
people just talk, the way influencers can come up completely outside any institutions or any sort of criticism, and we can just, like, guys like myself can just like have opinions about things, and
right.
God forbid they listen to me, but you get on people such as yourselves, and I'm just curious and this is a bit of a self-serving question because I wonder about this a lot. When we get into the endeavor of improvement and introspection, where are the pitfalls, especially today, how that interfaces with the internet and modern life, social media, where it becomes a problem
Yeah.
or off course, blah, 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 narcissism, etc.?
So you want me to be the crabby old guy now?
Well, I'm usually the crabby crank. And so, yeah, make me look good. No,
Yeah.
no, seriously, I think it's very important because that lack of criticism, I actually think it could be dangerous. And we're in a place where we do have a lot of influence. People have a lot of questions, and things are getting more and more weird and dynamic and transforming where people are looking where to turn. And I think for a lot, I know a lot of my friends and colleagues and people in this field, they genuinely want to help. But
Mhm.
you can be deluded in some ways inside systems that you're in or helping
Right.
promote. And I thought about Esalen. I'm like, well, I think Esalen, yeah, still is certainly heart's in the right place, but we're trying to figure out where can we go awry.
Yeah. So, wow, I have a lot to say about that.
I thought you would.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, I think, will agree with your concerns. Let me kind of, I don't even know where to start. So first of all, I work with young people. I mean, I teach 18 to 22-year-olds in the classroom, pretty much every day during the school year, every other day. And I work with graduate students who are usually in their 30s and 40s. And then, of course, I work with people in other ways too. And I think a lot of things have broken down. Um, I think about religion a lot. Historical religions had a way of reproducing themselves and passing their worldviews on to further generations through temples and, well, music and scripture and teaching and authority and all kinds of ways that was very efficient and very effective in creating a worldview and a stable worldview.
Mm-hmm.
The the downside of that is that it end up hurting or suppressing a lot of people who didn't fit into those worldviews or into those teachings. And I think we're very aware of that now. I think people are, and by people I mean young people, I mean people of all ages, are really concerned about the ways that their religions and cultures have excluded other human beings. And I think a lot of thoughtful, heartfelt people don't want to live in those exclusions anymore. And there aren't any clear answers, though. Um, Eslen's not an answer to this question either. The spiritual but not religious moniker is not an answer either. It's a kind of placeholder. Um, I think people are really upset morally for very good reasons, but they don't know where to turn because there isn't anywhere to turn.
Uh,
Um, and I think things are breaking down. And my own response to that is to let things break down. I mean, it's not that I can do anything about it, but to be curious and interested in that breakdown and not to morally condemn it like a lot of people do. And the reason I'm so interested in what most people call the paranormal is it's very deconstructive. It appears in the gaps, it appears in the margins, and it appears when things, structures, identities are breaking down. And I think we're definitely in a moment in which things are breaking down. And
mm,
I personally think, now this is just a personal belief, they should break down. I think they've been pretty bad. Um, but I don't have an answer to what comes next. I don't think anybody does, by the way. When I was young, I'll just tell you another story. When I was younger, and as a graduate student, I imagined that someone somewhere had the answer to things, and it was just a matter of reading books or talking to people or maybe meeting the right guru or something. And I just don't believe that anymore. I don't think anybody has the answer. I think we're basically lost, and that we should be lost, uh,
Mm.
because our previous being claims to being found were really, really hateful to a lot of human beings. And so that's kind of where I'm at. And so my spiritual response to this is embrace the uncertainty and embrace the breakdown, but don't pretend that you have or anyone has some kind of answer to this, because I just don't think they do. And I think we can come to some answers. I think we can come to some bigger stories that can start to address this, but that's going to take some time, and it's going to take some generations, and it's going to take some cultural investment, which I don't think we're serious about yet.
Do you think a logical response to a time where we feel lost is to grieve? Like that
Yeah.
is a natural reaction now more than action? Or, well, I don't want to compartmentalize it too much, but
One of the people, he didn't actually help train me. I didn't really know Peter very well when I was in school. His name's Peter Homans. He's long gone now, but Peter's basic argument was that the entire professional study of religion was one huge act of mourning.
oh,
And
of the human condition.
well,
of,
of a lost religious object,
uh,
that it was no longer possible to believe in 1990 or 1980 the way it was in 1580 or 1480, or just pick a date. And other people have said similar things, that the last half a century, and certainly in Europe and Euro-American culture, have been devastating on a lot of basic belief systems. And nihilism has been the kind of cultural challenge for a couple hundred years now. And I think we're still in a nihilistic moment. And I think young people in particular pick that up very quickly. And it's not just mourning and grief. I think it's depression. I think there's a lot of depression in the culture too, around this really deep cultural problem. It's not superficial.
are you speaking about nihilism almost like from a religious context, like the religion of nihilism,
No, I mean
or an
nihilism in
undercurrent?
yeah, I mean nihilism in the philosophical sense, that there is no meaning or purpose
Uh,
or goal in life. That you know, to each his own, as it were, and it's just about going to whatever numbers in your bank account, and how successful you are in a financial way. There's no big story
mhm.
that we're embedded in. We're not going anywhere. There's no meaning to anything, and I don't personally believe that, but I think that's the reigning worldview that we exist in, and I think the quicker we admit that, um, the quicker we can start to deal with it and address it honestly.
Do you think that like that kind of hyper individualism is partially responsible for pushing us into tribalism, like a search for community and affirmation and otherness?
I think fundamentalism is a response to nihilism.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I do. I think fundamentalism is very attractive to people because it pretends to give certainty in a world that is uncertain. And um, I think that's attractive to people because we need that.
Sure.
We
Yeah.
we just we need to live in communities, and we need walls around ourselves. And I don't dismiss that. Fundamentalism, or what we call exclusivism in the study of religion, is very attractive and very emotionally powerful. And I think that's something we really, and I think frankly, like the sciences, for example, do a horrific job. I think they prop up fundamentalism, frankly, because they create more and more nihilism, and so people just become more and more fundamentalist, because it's like, well, screw that. I mean, and I'm like, yeah, I don't blame you, but I don't believe your answers either. It's just not. It's a matter of being honest and saying, look, that doesn't work anymore.
I heard you say that like materialism is not like a direct response from science. That's more like an interpretation. And
Yeah.
maybe that's a bit like I hear you what you're saying. It's like it's not actually science as much as what we're what we're doing with our interpretation of it
Yeah, I
as a
should say.
response in
Yeah,
itself.
I should say scientists don't help. I mean, science. Well, again, science is scientists. I don't. Science is what scientists do, and what they say. And then unfortunately, they say some pretty silly and philosophically naive things that I think make the situation far far worse than it needs to be. I love science. I love what science has done, but scientists, I argue with them all the time because they're just saying things that are just not part of science, and they conflate a kind of pragmatic or technological value with the truth of things, and I just think that's wrong. I just think that adds to our problems.
Yeah. So if that's the case, and that's part of the predicament we're in as a people, kind of maybe a corner we've put ourselves in, and we're looking for answers. It seems that the other polarity of that would be somatics or the felt experience or the individual felt experience, which is something I feel it's difficult to at least argue with your own felt experiences. That's why certain psychedelic experiences for me have been so salient because I'm not really interpreting as much like that happened. I had certain feelings of understanding, and
Right.
now that's part of my life. And in some ways, it helps me to put my arms around a bit some of these complex ideas of loss or feeling loss, but also of things that I want to find an answer in my mind, but there's no answer. Like right now, there's a lot of wanting to find an answer. And as you're saying, maybe there isn't one at this moment, or it's becoming still. What are your thoughts on the role of psychedelic experiences or altered states in general as a
Yeah.
way, as part of this?
Yeah. Again, I have tons of thoughts and opinions
Uh,
there that I'm happy to impose on you.
Well, let me make it more pointed. We don't have to go into the history or even, but where it's at right now, because it's really burgeoning into this space. Some people call it a resonance, and there's pros and cons to that. It's getting commercialized. It's getting it also
Mhm.
sort of like microdosing, and it's just so where we're at today with it.
Yeah, so I know a lot of the researchers, and I'm very tapped into that community. And um, it's striking to me that none of the researchers ever hire a humanist or a historian or a philosopher. They just go and they hire more psychiatrists and more they deal with pharmaceutical companies, or they go to their lab, or what they use science to try to understand something that is fundamentally not science. And I think that's extremely dangerous and naive. And I think what should happen now is that these researchers should be talking to philosophers and historians and scholars who actually know something about
Mm.
mystical experience. And it's not that they have the answers either. I'm not suggesting these people have the answers. I'm just saying this is an experience um, of consciousness that is not an object that can be measured in your
Mm.
scientific method. And please stop saying that. And and I also don't think that we're being honest about the negative aspects of psychedelics. I mean, people have really bad experiences on psychedelics too. And that's part of the sacred, by the way. Any scholar of religion will shake you loose immediately from the idea that the sacred is the good. That's complete nonsense. And and so the idea that people have negative experiences on psilocybin or DMT or whatever it is does not surprise me in the least.
Yeah.
I would expect that. But that doesn't mean it's negative. That doesn't mean there are demons in the room. It just means it's a sacred experience. And we have to take that in as well and come to understand that. But again, nobody's listening to us. No, nobody's talking to people who actually know something about this stuff. They're talking to scientists and chemists and psychologists who are just not the people you should be talking to. I'm sorry. It's just, I just think
Yeah.
those are not the right right methods to figure out what's going on. And again, it's not that the humanists and the philosophers suddenly have the answer. I'm not suggesting that, but they will have questions, and they will nuance our thinking and our cultures around this in a way that no one else can. Anthropologists, too, by the way, anthropologists tend to be great on this topic.
That I never would have thought. I suppose because of the use of these sort of substances in the past and just sort of like recognizing practices.
Well, anthropologists are trained to go to, first of all, not assume the universalism of their own culture and their own understanding of what's
Mm-hmm.
real or not. And they go into the field, whatever that is, and they have very strange experiences. And they come back, and their whole professional career is about trying to make sense of those experiences that often you can't make sense of and do not fit into the framework of historical Marxism or something, which the academy assumes to be the case. And so I'm very fond of anthropologists who have taken that ontological turn, as it were. Um, and I'm very fond of philosophers who have as well. But wow, they're few and far between. Let me tell you, it's a hard path. Because the academy wants to assume a kind of rational subject, and that the consciousness is the body, and they make all kinds of assumptions that simply don't follow through, when you start talking about altered states.
It's one thing to, I suppose, study the changes or results, like just measures of how people feel, or like is someone more or less depressed down the line, things like that. I mean, it's it's good to know, but I think the experience itself, you can never put your arms around it
Is
ever.
I mean, is the point of your psychedelic openings that you feel good now? I mean, is that really the point? I mean,
No,
I,
it's spiritual. Honestly, it's more just like it's some of the deepest. I don't have more answers when I'm done. I just feel richer, broader in a way. But there's understandings that I can't even put into words.
yeah, and they have nothing to do with feeling good, or it's not a pharmaceutical or a therapeutic result. It's a spiritual result. And I hear this over and over from people, that what's actually given in these states is something that doesn't fit into the questionnaires and to the
It's the
the,
bubble. Yeah.
the bubble that
Which one of these? I don't know.
right. I mean, you just sort of put it in the terms I think is helpful here. I first of all, I've done psychedelics once in another country because I was so afraid of the legal ramifications of this country, which are brutal. Um, but I know a lot of people who have been on psychedelics, and I talk to them about this, and what they tell me is that the psilocybin or the DMT or whatever it is, it doesn't actually cure whatever condition they have, but it relativizes that condition, and
Yeah.
it puts it in a context that is much, much bigger than they realized before. And it's not that the condition goes away; it's just that it doesn't mean the same thing anymore. It's like, yeah, okay. Um, so I think that's really helpful. And the other thing I think, and I've said this before, is monotheism has not done well with psychoactive plants.
That's yeah, that's true.
And the reason is that monotheism works with a logic that is essentially supernatural, that the agency of the religious event is outside the natural world. It lies in God. And so any genuine experience that's religious the agent has to be God. But with you ingest a mushroom or a vine or a tea or something, it's clearly part of the natural world. And the experience one has is a kind of panpsychic or monistic experience of the natural world. It's a very different theology than this monotheistic theology that has really defined a lot of Western culture. And so I think there's a theological crisis going on, and my worry is a kind of pushback, that of a kind of monotheism versus the this psychedelic renaissance that I think is also going on. But I think there are profound theological issues here, religious questions that are not even being addressed.
Such
Um,
as, like, what's a?
well, does God exist outside the universe, or is God the universe? Or is it both?
I was gonna say, take a mushroom, like both.
Well, okay, but that's a theology,
Yeah.
that most people don't have,
Mm,
and um, that would change everything. Including our ecological crisis, by the way.
yeah.
If we really understood human agency and the human being in a way that was in a completely different religious register, I think we would make different decisions, and we would act differently.
Is that part of what you were saying when you thought like we're not using the right instruments for today, or what are those instruments you think would be more relevant?
Altered states. I think we need a method that honors altered states as veridical and as real sources of knowledge. And what science does is it dismisses all altered states as a statistical blip. They don't matter, and they're not taken as evidence because they're just anomalies in the system. And they're anecdotal, to use the dismissive language of the debunkers. I think that's just fundamentally wrong. I think it's philosophically wrong. I think it's morally wrong. And I think it's philosophically wrong. Um, and I think we need to say that, and say that to these people who are saying the opposite.
I've told this joke before, but it fits in what you're talking about. Terrence McKenna, people will say, well, you saw a UFO. You're like, yes, I did. And they're like, were you loaded? And he says, well, of course I was. That's why I saw the UFO. That's the so segue, but same subject. Things like just the last few days, there's been some strange developments in sort of governmental panels and some of these things that
I
were
watched it, by the way. I watched the congressional hearing. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah. What I've followed this for decades, and I can see some of these players that before I was a bit dismissive of, and here they are, and here I'm like, what is going on? We think about the mythic and the poetic as being the answers and sort of the things that can't quite be pinned down. And how do you see this fitting in, or what do you think is going on?
I think the UFO, and by the way, I insist that it's a UFO. The UAP stuff drives me
It's
nuts.
because
It's
they go
just,
underwater. That's what
it's
they're saying.
just,
It's not just
well,
aerial.
okay, but still, the UAP, it's an attempt to kind of cover up this. It's like calling
It's a cover
psychedelics.
up of a cover up.
It
Yeah.
is a cover up. It's like calling psychedelics entheogens or something. I mean, just come on. Let's deal with our past. I think the UFO or the UAP issue is actually really significant here. And if you watch the congressional hearings, what you saw was that it's okay to talk about this today if it's a technology or it involves national security or it's a military professional. It's not okay to listen to the experiencers where the experience is going to be way weirder than we heard yesterday. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, there's more details there, I'm sure. Yeah.
There's a lot more going on than we're being told in Congress. I'll tell you that. Um, and so, my colleagues in this area, they'll say, "Well, let's get this going." And it's kind of like the psychedelic community, the psychiatrists. It's like, no, let's get the pharmaceutical companies involved and let's get the laws changed, and then we're going to talk about these mystical experiences. And I think the attitude in the UFO world is something like that. The people who are really into it and who know a lot about it know that the technological aspect is only one. The physical technological thing is just kind of the surface of a rabbit hole in which a lot of paranormal things frankly happen around UFO encounters that nobody's talking about.
Hmm.
Um, and I think so. I think it's a similar situation. I'm fascinated by the developments as well. I think they're good. I love the fact that we're in Congress yesterday and that we have politicians who can talk about these things without losing their reputations or their careers. Um, but again, we're just talking about it in terms of national security. We're not really talking about the phenomenon itself, which is, again, much weirder and much more trickier than is being talked about.
Yeah, beyond it being weird, there's also like an element of confounding comicalness to it. McKenna would also say things like, and why is it that though sometimes when you have these sightings and so forth, sometimes this what not like Navy pilots and stuff, but like the people who have these stories, it's always like there's always some caveat or some strange like, oh, it's you, it's old Joe who's always drinking, or it's like, and it's almost like it's built into the system somehow where it's like we
Yeah,
can't quite get over the like it's
yeah,
just enough. And anything from crop circles to sightings to stories, and it does make it, even the people who are pushing a lot. I mean, Tom DeLonge, who's one of the guys who's behind, I'm a musician, he's a musician from a band from the 90s. It's like it's
right.
almost a joke. No disrespect, Tom, it's just, I'm sure he has to overcome that as well. It's
Yeah.
strange.
I don't think a colleague of mine named George Hansen wrote a book called The Trickster and the Paranormal. And his argument is essentially that the paranormal is itself is deceptive. And I think we're not willing to talk about that. I think we're willing to talk about human deception and disinformation campaigns and intelligence communities and assumed corporate projects, et cetera. But we're not actually willing to say yet in public that, you know what, maybe the phenomena itself is deceiving us, and
Wow.
that's part of the landscape here. And you know what? Again, I'll tell you, the religious has always deceived. It's always been deceptive. It's not just the UFO thing is a very modern sci-fi version of something that's been happening for millennia. And I don't think, again, we're talking to the historians and the philosophers and the people who actually know something about this. I think we're just assuming that we can solve or address this thing with technology and science and military, and we just can't. It's just not possible.
Well, what are you and your friends saying or thinking that this is this some sort of unveiling, or is it increasing, or is it more we just have more cameras and we're noticing more things, or is
Well,
it actually
our technology is better, right?
sure?
Our
Yeah.
radar is better, so we can see things we couldn't see before. But human beings have always had. Listen, my joke is, strange beings come out of the sky and screw with people. Well, that's religion. I mean, come on. I mean, and it's a joke, but it's also true that human beings have been reporting these sorts of events for as far as we can see back in history. And I'm not proposing a naive History Channel scenario here. What I'm exactly saying is that our ancestors used religious and mythological language to describe these events, and today we use scientific and technological and military language, and neither one of them work. That whatever's going on is escaping those religious and mythological frameworks. It's also escaping the scientific and technological frameworks. And we simply do not have a framework in which we can understand this. And
Wow.
that's my argument.
That's crazy. It's like we have no tools to even
I don't
approach.
I don't think we have I wouldn't say that. I think we actually do have tools to approach it, but we're not using them. Like apophatic forms of mystical experience, I think is very close to what's actually going on. But no one's going to talk about Meister Eckhart or Nagarjuna or Plotinus, um, in these contexts, unless, of course, you're a crazy historian of religions, a crazy professor of religion somewhere. So I do think we have resources. but they're not being used, and I think the traditional religious ones and the traditional scientific ones are inadequate.
Hmm.
And
That,
I don't know that third thing I'm talking about. I'm not saying we have all the answers in the past, so we just have to read Eckhart and
right,
Nagarjuna.
right.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying we have resources in our cultural past to deal with the complexity of this thing, but that itself is a beginning. It's not a conclusion, or it's not an adequate way to address this thing.
Do you see it fit the phenomenon fitting into the same way you might view synchronicity, or
It's
even
filled
just
with synchronicity, by the way. It provokes synchronicity.
yeah? So tell me a little bit more about how we can look at these viewpoints, because paranormal, synchronicity, psychedelic mysticism, I feel them all kind of like swimming in a similar world, and I'm
Yeah.
trying to put this for my own sense of meaning on top of like whatever this acceleration or concrescence it feels like we are moving towards.
I think so. I mean, I love Terence McKenna. I mean, come on. I think the guy was onto something, and I know Dennis quite well. And I, Terence loved Esalen,
Yeah,
and he was one of our most beloved teachers in the 1990s before he died in 2000. And I think Terence had a sense of a kind of the eschaton that was deeply felt. And I think the UFO stuff, I think the psychedelic stuff is part of that eschaton, or part of that ending, part of that coming apart that I was referring to earlier. And we don't know how it comes together. Um, but again, I guess at the end of the day, I do have a lot of confidence in um, future generations and in human beings. But I don't have a lot of confidence in our present answers or our present ways of handling this, because I just I don't think it's handling it. I think it's denying it.
hmm. And how do you see AI fitting into that? Do you think it's part of the same?
You're just going everywhere, aren't you?
Yeah,
Uh,
well, these are all the things I'm thinking about.
yeah,
Well, because that to me is not actually separate in a lot of ways, and it's kind of amazing to me. Anyone could stand back from all of this stuff and just be like, these are all just disparate, like individual, like AI is a channel and a vertical, and these different things going, even from politics to religion to geopolitical situations to technology to
yeah.
psychedelics.
So my own view, and this is again, it's not a very learned view, but my own view is that artificial intelligence is neither artificial nor intelligent. It's very much a creation of human beings, and the idea that um, computers are going to become conscious or intelligent is a materialist or physicalist dream,
Right.
and I think it's just mistaken. I don't think computers ever will be conscious or intelligent in that way. I think they'll be able to mimic and do a lot of really cool things and pretend to be intelligent, and we can figure things out with AI that we can't figure out now. So I'm not suggesting otherwise, but I think the idea that computers can take on intelligence or consciousness is just like saying that consciousness is a function of brain cells, and I just don't believe it. I just think that's mistaken. I think the evidence suggests quite the contrary, that the human brain is a kind of filter or receiver of consciousness. And that has tremendous implications, including for AI, which I think are need to be listened to as well. Um, so I think AI is like any other technology. It can be used for very nefarious reasons, and human beings are going to screw this thing up like they've screwed everything else up. But that doesn't mean that the technology itself or the computer science itself has to be nefarious. It doesn't. But it's always a function of the human beings who are using it.
Definitely. And it's not to say, I mean, on one level, we're biological, but we're a kind of computer with neurotransmitters and electrical impulses, and we don't know how that makes what we perceive as consciousness or identity, or if there's some being in that, the soul. So, how is a machine different? I just know, I agree with you. I don't think it could ever be conscious, but at the same time, I'm like, I wonder, like, if you got down to making computers almost biological, is there, what makes it alive?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to do with how you think of the human being, and I, I just, I just don't think of us in mechanical or strictly biological terms, and I think that I think the evidence suggests that as well. That's not just a that's not an assumption, an uneducated assumption I'm making. There are a lot of paranormal things that happen that make absolutely no sense if consciousness is produced by the brain and the body. But they actually make really good sense if consciousness is distributed throughout the universe and the brain and the body are just picking it up and receiving it, as it were.
So that's more of like an interconnected view. Like if you see that sort of interconnectedness, there's a lot more interaction, cause and effect.
Yeah, I mean, we can get into this. I wrote a book called The Flip, and I describe myself as a dual aspect monist. And essentially, what that comes down to is this idea that consciousness is fundamental to the cosmos or universe, and the brain and the body are translating it into a person or into a social ego, but it's not that social ego, and reality is not mental and it's not material. It's something beyond both of those things that certainly appear as split up in the human being, but only split apart because of the human being. The reality itself is neither, in that particular position. Um, and I think that's kind of where a lot of this stuff goes, frankly. I think it tends in that direction.
What
I
is death in that model though? Is that just that then it's just the ceasing of the particular identity being formed by just the body?
basically, I mean, it depends on what you mean by the identity. Um, it dual aspect monism, with the way I'm using it, presumes that Jeff is really a function of this body and of this society and this language game we're in right now, and that when Jeff dies, so what? I mean, that just means the body and the brain pass away. Um, and it might mean that the identity itself is no more, but that doesn't mean that the consciousness that enlivens Jeff is no more. It exists before him and after him in a really profound way.
Do you differentiate between metaphysics or paranormal, or is it a definition thing?
I don't understand the question.
Well, I heard you talk about metaphysics and politics, which I was like, wow, never thought about those two together, how they
Yeah.
influence one another. But when you use the word paranormal, I'm just curious, like, before I ask that question, if it's different than metaphysics.
To me, a paranormal phenomena is an event that exists in both the physical world, but also in the mental or subjective world. It's something that violates our normal distinction between the inside and the outside. So a synchronicity is a perfect example of a real powerful synchronicity is a perfect example of a paranormal event. And I also use paranormal in the way it was intended. It was coined in 1903 in French, and it simply meant something that is happening in the physical world for which we do not have a scientific explanation,
Hmm.
and that relates to some kind of subjective state or altered state of the person experiencing it. I don't use it in the sense, the Barnes and Noble romantic paranormal romance session. I don't use it in this. It's not about vampires and it's not about sexy vampires. It's about paradoxical events that don't fit into a psychological or a physicalist model.
Okay. So I hear the trickster in there again, too, sort of from a mythical point of view.
Well, this
So,
is why it's tricky, is because it's tricky in relationship to our assumptions, the way we
hmm.
split the world up, which is just not so.
How are we splitting the world? How are most people splitting? Is it too dualistic
Yeah,
or?
I mean, if
Okay.
you're like me, I mean, I know how I split it up. There's an inner state that I identify with myself, and then there's these physical objects out there, and they don't have anything to do with one another. They're completely separate from me, and um, that's how I split the world up. I assume that's how most people split the world up. And what happens in a paranormal event is that breaks down, and the physical world suddenly it behaves like it's you. Um, and I would argue that's because it is.
Mm.
Um, the world, the physical world is you, and you are the physical world. And this distinction you're making between this interior self and this exterior world is just not what's actually so.
So in some ways, do we need more metaphysics?
Yeah,
At,
absolutely.
and,
Absolutely.
so
I mean, we
what?
should all be we should be talking metaphysics. And again, that's precisely what you can't do. You're not allowed to do that, by the way.
No, no, you're not. I guess Marianne Williamson is taking a stab in some ways, but that no, it's not talked about. It's actually derided immediately as pseudoscience or just not even listened to.
Yeah.
Is there a way to thread that needle, do you think, to bring that more into the cultural conversation?
Well, I think what's happening in Congress and the psychedelic renaissance is going to force the issue. I think at some point we're going to have to start talking metaphysics, and um, we're not doing that yet because we think it's all about pharmaceutical companies and the military. But eventually we're going to figure out, what it actually has to do with reality and the nature of mind or consciousness, and we have to sort of rethink everything.
Wow. Yeah, things got a lot stranger when we got so interconnected on this planet through devices and the internet information. And it's sort of like that's almost a manifestation of perhaps how things have been. But
Well, let me be the crabby old guy for a minute.
yeah,
I mean, so the internet and the digital world, which we're in right at the moment, right? I mean, this is it. Um, it's given us a lot of things, but that's how the devil works. The devil gives you things as he takes a lot of other things away. And one of the things I've noticed in myself, but also in my students, is that we don't read anymore.
yeah.
And I mean that very seriously. Um,
Well, it's true.
reading,
It's just on the number of books sold, like, 50,000 books now is a bestseller. And it is a lot of books, but that's like if you sell 5,000, that's like a big deal.
I mean, reading, long reading, and the transformation that occurs through reading is simply not a practice anymore. People think they can get everything off the internet or Google their way into enlightenment, and it's just not true. And there's a kind of what I call a Twitter for, I know Twitter doesn't exist anymore, but there's a kind of Twitterization of consciousness that has been going on for about a decade or so. And I've noticed in my students and I've noticed in myself. So I'm guilty as well. There's a decline of attention
Yeah.
that has been going on for 20 years now, or at least 10, 15 years. And I think that's a real serious problem. Try to talk to people about ideas, and they haven't read anyone. They don't know anything, and they think they can figure out Marx or Hegel or Nietzsche or Nagarjuna or Shankara or whoever it is, just looking it up on Wikipedia. And I'm like, no, you can't. You actually can't do that. That doesn't work. You actually have to read these authors in a really profound and contemplative fashion. And that's just something pe- people in general can't do anymore. So that's my crabby old guide self.
Are
I
you
do.
finding that you can't even use writing as a mechanism of testing because of ChatGPT in the university system? Is it hard to do that
I,
now?
I haven't seen that yet. I'm sure that will come. Students will try to essentially fake a term paper. Um, but I teach at a very elite university where the young people are extremely smart, and I've read papers by undergraduates that are as good or better than anything I've ever read um, elsewhere. So I know people can still do this, but I guess I want them to do it. I want to see more of it, and I do think we've lost a lot um, by losing the book.
Yeah, the fragmentation of our attention has been profound in
Yeah,
many ways since the iPhone, really. And
I mean, come
yeah,
on. Let me go now and do my text message. I mean, it's really bad. And when do we read? I mean, when do we read? And I mean, really read. I mean, read an author that's not easy, and spend hundreds of hours with this author, and not 30 seconds or 10 minutes or something.
well, it's getting harder to actually do it because, like you said, it's even less a choice. It's like I'm having trouble sticking with it uh,
Yeah.
unless it's more engaging or
Yeah, I
yeah.
got to check my email now, or I've got to, this thing just
Or
dinged.
the writing itself has to be kind of I don't want to say dumbed
And
down, but
so here's the other thing. Okay, this is still Crabby Jeff talking. So my main spiritual practice is, in fact, writing. And I write every morning, and I get up very early, and I write, and I publish books. And the reason I do that is, first of all, it makes me happy. It's a spiritual practice for me. It's a discipline. But I also hear from readers, and very strange and wonderful things happen around reading these books. And I realize that those books can impact people all around the globe 24 hours a day, regardless of my state of mind. And that I don't even have to be alive. I mean, they're going to continue doing work after I'm dead. And to me, that's an amazing thing that is not available in any other way. And I really believe in that. I really believe that there's something profound that happens in the act of reading, and that an author can put his or her or their heart and soul on the page, and that the reader can essentially reenact or invoke that presence, and similar kind of work can be done. So there's a kind of that's a scriptural conviction, I guess, which I very much hold, because I've seen it happen, um, and I know it can happen. So
I feel similarly about recorded music, and that if I'm long gone,
yeah,
people can use
well,
it in the same ways, and so I get it. It's just a different medium.
I think music, you know, the truth is most human beings have not been able to read in human history, but they
Mm.
have been able to listen to music.
Or play
And,
music, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, they
yeah.
haven't necessarily been able to play it either,
Well,
but
it's, sing it, or it's their
yeah,
participatory.
yeah.
Yeah,
Or art.
yeah.
Most people have imbibed the worldview through art and architecture, and so there are these media that I think are really powerful and really exist well after we're gone. We're so temporary. Our lives are so short, regardless of what we think. Um, and music is something that I don't understand. Actually, there were two classes in the seminary that I almost failed. One was Christian ethics, and the other was musicology. And I just I just didn't have an ear. I mean, the other they were all men. The other guys in the class, they really understood music, and they could hear things, and they could write it down. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. It's just like, no, sorry, I not don't get it. And but I understand that other people do have that gift, and and so that and I love music. I'm like all other human beings. I
That's
love
what I was
music.
gonna say. Like you can still
Oh gosh, yeah.
respond to music as we all can, which is so amazing. Yeah.
But people are different again, and we don't all have those musical abilities, and I don't think we all have spiritual abilities, and we don't all have intellectual or mathematical abilities. People are really different, and um, I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Well, We'll end this by, let me just tell me like what you're kind of excited about or interested in right now, and or if there's something we could point people to.
Yeah. So what I'm most excited about is something called the Archives of the Impossible, which is a project at Rice University. It's an actual archive that I oversee. And Jacques Vallée actually started it about 10 years ago now with we negotiated his gift. And these are gifts of writers really around anomalous phenomena. Some of it's UFO related, some of it's physical mediumship, some of it's remote viewing, some of it's, there's a lot of it spans a lot of different issues. And I'm interested in this for all the reasons we talked about. It will live far, far beyond my own lifetime. And people from all over the country or even the world can come and do research in these archives and find things that are just totally wild and just don't fit in. And that's the point. I as an intellectual or as a thinker, I'm most interested in things that don't fit in. And that's, I suppose that's my bias. But I do believe that human beings, none of us fit in. Even people who think they fit into a culture, they really don't. They're just kind of kidding themselves for a while. And I think human experience is always exceeding whatever the culture or the religion happens to be at the time. And so I put my money on the human being, not on the culture or the religion.
Culture is not your friend. Yes.
It's also your enemy. I mean, come on. I mean, people suffer because of their cultures.
Yeah. Well, where can people find you and your books? I suppose they're kind of everywhere, but
so I have a website that's really good, which means I did not create it. It's called jeffreyjkripal.com.
cool.
And that's the best place to go. And you can't buy anything there, but you can kind of get a summary of everything. You just go on wherever you buy your books. I mean, they'll pop right up. It's mostly University of Chicago Press is where I publish out of, but it's all available in the usual channels.
Great. I really enjoyed this. I hope we can do it again, or maybe cross paths at Esalen.
Yeah, let's do it.
Elsewhere.
Let's do it again when I figure out the truth. And,
yeah. Yeah, that was on my list. Truth. We didn't get to it. No.
Yeah, maybe when Congress figures out the truth, we can.
God,
they figured it out.
Won't hold my breath. Yeah,
they did it. Those
some senator from Alabama finally got the truth. Yeah, it was fun talking, and thank you for taking the time and a hot day.
Yeah, you too. And thanks for putting up with my digital confusion there for a moment.
Oh, it's great. It's great. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for coming on the show. I hope you do it again, because it's clear that there's so many different avenues we could jump into and explore, and that was a fun one. Thank you again for being so generous to just sort of go wherever I wanted to go with that conversation. I really loved it. Thank you. His link is in the show notes down there, and you can check out his writings and his all sorts of things that he's offering. So please do support. This song that you're hearing in the background is called Cosmic Dance, featuring Maryam, and it is off the album Music for the Deck of the Titanic. That is my new album that is rolling out. We just released the third single called So What, featuring Duncan Trussell. If you haven't seen the video, definitely head over to East Forest Music on YouTube and check out David Lobser's crazy AI video for that. And I just heard from Duncan for the first time in a long time that he finally listened to it, and he's like, it's good. I was like, thank God. So he's in support. And thank you again to everyone on our council. Check it out, patreon.com/eastforest. We hope to see you on the road. All the tour dates are at eastforest.org/tour. And until then, you keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit, but if you do it with grace.